Good afternoon. Thanks for joining us. We're extremely excited that you guys invited us back to offer you a follow-up to our first consultation. As you know, during our first consultation, we advised you on a set of criteria, and while developing that criteria, we kind of used the Northeast as a case example. And so naturally, in evaluating the four options the FRC has to choose between, we decided to continue with the Northeast. Several assumptions that we developed in that involved the upgrades to trains and tracks. We assumed that those were embedded in the estimated costs of each project. We also assumed that all of the applicants have the money to fund their portion of the project, that 50% that we'll be matching. Additionally, public transportation users should be willing to and wanting to use the high-speed rail if we offer a cheaper or more efficient service. On the screen, you see the four different options that you have to choose between. We realize that the FRC has been mandated to select one option to demonstrate that the United States can succeed in the high-speed rail industry, and Gustavo will talk more about why the Northeast is the choice to make.
Okay, well, if we want to see what is the best alternative, we have to compare the pros and the cons with the four alternatives that we have. But we have also considered what is the objective that we have to consider right now. And this is to build the highest speed rails as soon as possible. So based on that, we were doing the pros and the cons. What is the pros, for example, between the Northwest and the Midwest? Is both alternatives not so expensive, but the cons is that they have a low demand for these projects. So it will be, the public benefit will be not so high. In the case of California, of course, it can be more expensive than the Northwest and the Midwest, but the cons is like already California has a project that is not working. Well, the plan, will not work. So this is in qualitative terms, but if we can see the hard numbers, we can see, for example, that the Northeast, instead of has the higher cost is per person is $3,000 approximately per person. That project will not need an upgrade. So it's one factor that we have to consider. Also, in the case of the Northwest, we consider the readership per melt. The Northwest has the lowest ratio, but the Northeast is almost in the average. It's a little high more than average. So in this case, we can see that the Northwest can be a little higher ratio than the average, but it's still the best option.
So there are a multitude of factors that we considered when we chose the Northeast. First of all, cost. A lot of times it comes down to numbers. So a cost consideration that we took into account was through our research. And we saw that in China, they introduced a rail system between two major populated cities. In that situation, because of the high-speed rail, they actually drove down the cost of airfare. So it's a huge public benefit to allow the high-speed rail to enter into a competitive marketplace. Another social benefit that correlates with cost is congestion. Why put a high-speed rail into a place where maybe there isn't a lot of traffic? Looking between Boston and DC, there is a high number of congestion. If anyone's ever driven through New York City, you know exactly what I'm talking about. So having a high-speed rail that could take you from Boston, New York, Philadelphia, DC would eliminate a lot of the congestion. We like to follow the centralized plan that we've seen in Europe. In Paris, they decided to link congested and metropolis-like cities. And we believe that in the Northeast, because there's a large number of grouped cities with a high population, that we would fit quite nicely into the centralized plan, which we've seen is successful in Paris and with the French model. With this, of course, will come jobs, and jobs are very important in 2010. We know how hard we've been hit by the 2009 recession. We need to keep that in mind, building up the economy. With this in the Northeast, we have a great opportunity here. We can simply upgrade the lines already put down. This is a huge advantage over the other three possibilities. Why is that? First and foremost, besides cost, is the environmental impact. If we're just upgrading the lines that are already there, we're reducing significantly the impacts that we'll have on the environment. And of course, there's national security risks. We know that New York and Boston tend to be a target, unfortunately, same with Washington, D.C. for terrorist activity. However, because of their unfortunate experiences with that, they have heightened security procedures. In fact, in a lot of circumstances, the New York City Police Department is considered to be the standard for how to deal with terrorism concerns. So we believe the Northeast corridor would be an excellent example to set for the rest of the nation if it is successful, to which we think it will be. So just kind of breaking it down to make it very clear, the pros and cons of the Northeast compared to the other programs that we've provided. Again, we have the time effectiveness of simply upgrading the rails, and as the FRC has clearly stated in your parameters, the top priority for you is how quickly this can be done. We believe by simply replacing lines instead of building new lines and possibly having issues with land, how to acquire it, how to develop it, this would be the most time and cost-effective alternative. Again, there's the greatest chance of profitability. These are some of the most marketable cities in the country. DC, Boston, New York City run the country's GDP. So to have them connected by a high-speed rail, we think would actually improve our nation's economy. Again, through the centralized model, we believe this would be the most effective. There are some cons, but there are some counter arguments to some of the cons that I've talked about before with the terrorism concerns. Again, we have the experience, and there is already a demand in place for people in the Northeast because they already rely on public transportation. So in places like the Northwest or California or the Midwest, where they don't necessarily use the subway system very often or use public transit, it might be harder to actually get them to engage with the idea of using a high-speed rail. Here, it wouldn't be an issue. We know that people like to use the train, take Metro North, Metro South, and we hope that they would like it.
So we did a little bit of risk and mitigation analysis. So the first risk we target is the terrorism. So that's the first priority concern for FRC office is the security. So we thought about it, and then we think people in the Northeast would have more experience and awareness of how to protect and how to conduct a more secure, more environment in that sense. Another risk is the higher costs. Yes, this is the highest cost among the 4 projects, but we will have a much higher social return in this project if we are having a high-speed rail in northeast of the country. So compared to the readership, we have the equal higher readership compared to California, and we have the highest population density in northeast area. Another risk is the decentralized plan. In the article is favored by the European expert, but actually in the northeast where cities are clustered, so that means the network between cities are smaller. So we think the centralized model will actually works better in this area.
To sum up, the Northeast has the highest cost. We realize that the financial burden is great, but the costs need to be considered in context with the social return that's offered, and the social rate of return is greater with the Northeast. Additionally, the FRC has one chance to get this right, or else we risk losing the chance to make high-speed rail succeed in America. And for that reason, we can't advise you to go with any of the 3 other options with good conscience, because the higher cost is in those projects. Those projects risk ruining high-speed rail as a transportation system for all Americans.
This is a pilot program. We recognize that, we see that. So with that, we want to keep in mind this is a pioneering project. We're trying to change the culture of transportation in America and bring people back to the railroads. Questions?
Thank you.
Question?
So if we're going to go up to Northeast, how are you going to deal with Amtrak, and how do you differentiate your plan versus Amtrak, what it does today?
Our plan will be primarily passenger trains as Amtrak handles. But the difference is Amtrak will handle some smaller cities to other smaller cities and eventually connect to the major hubs. Our high-speed rail will focus on connecting mainly the hubs, the major hubs, DC, Boston, New York City that we outlined. And then neighboring smaller secondary markets can connect to those major hubs through the Amtrak service. So we won't be putting Amtrak out of business. We'll be working hand in hand with Amtrak to further the development of rail transportation.
And we will try to provide a better service in terms of the schedule, we will provide a quicker, on-time, and convenient service for the passengers.
Interesting, you think we'll not be putting out of business. We could discuss that another day.
I would maybe suggest the idea that maybe it wouldn't be a bad idea to have competition with Amtrak. Why not increase the social benefit by bringing down cost? Last time I tried to book an Amtrak ticket to New York City, it was about $150. It cost me $50 to drive. So we're America. Let's bring up the competition.
Okay.
So it's going to be an upgraded line, and I understand that there's, how fast will these trains actually end up going, given that it's an upgraded line?
150. I believe it's 150 miles per hour, but I would have to double check the statistics for you.
I thought the line was, you were able to use the existing line, you had to upgrade the engines and cars.
Yes, and that was one of the cons, was that would be an associated cost.
The engines and cars.
Yes,
You
sir.
were able to use existing ones.
Yes,
Right.
sir.
So can I ask a question, follow-up question on that? So did you take into account the economic stimulus component of this exercise? And if you don't have to lay new track in the Northeast, whereas you might have to in the other, that will create jobs and benefit? How did you think about creating that?
Yes. So some of the benefit comes from the development of the service industry. We see from models in Japan that they were really able to develop their service industry further and interconnect it throughout the country by using that rail transportation system. Likewise, since we're connecting the major service hubs, DC, Boston, New York City, we'll grow the economy that way. And in the long run, we can evaluate the benefits of doing some construction along the lines to improve rail speeds along certain parts of the corridor.
Are the cars and engines US made?
While we would like them to be, initially we would have to use European cars, but in that process we can use US firms to learn in the process and train US engineers to handle it in the long term while we expand it into the other 3 corridors in the future, because we'll succeed in the first time.
And additional to that, I think the service line will provide more long-term employee, which will benefit in the long term compared to where the track needs to be replaced. They will also only provide short-term construction employees in that period.
And the speed with which this would be able to be established in the Northeast versus the others, I apologize, I don't remember.
Just in the Northwest is 220 miles per hour, so it just needs an upgrade.
I'm sorry, the speed to get the pilot implemented.
Oh, okay.
I'm not sure we saw that.
Budget-wise, it's 7 to 8 years based on our calculations, based on the technology that we can bring in for the trains. That would have to be done in consultation with European firms, again, to get the initial cars.
So this is inside. Our limit is 2020, right?
Right.
So we can inside in this period.
And the biggest benefit would be no surprises with acquisition of land or lawsuits. Since we already have the land, we have the rails.
Excellent.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much.